We're recording.
All
Cool.
right.
So hi, Dr. Kath. Welcome. We're really excited to have you and learn a little bit about IO.
Thanks.
Yay. Oh no, why is my internet connection unstable? Don't tell me that. Okay, so to start, just give me a little background about yourself, kind of how, like, from your early education to kind of what brought you to where you are today.
Okay. And my pathway, unfortunately, is not an example for others, but I'll just go ahead and tell you how it all got started. Um, when I applied to college, I liked science. That's kind of all I knew. And I applied to biology and chemistry programs. I applied to a whopping 3 schools and got into 2 of them. And so it
Wow.
was just a different time, right? And so I went to UC Berkeley and I was a chemistry major. And I wasn't sure if I was going to stay a chemistry major, but I stuck it out. I had a wonderful first year chemistry teacher and stuck it out and ended up really liking organic chemistry and became an organic chemist. And I worked at a biotech company called Gilead Sciences, which sometimes you see in the news right now because they work on antivirals. Then I moved across the country and worked for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals and worked on an anti-atherosclerosis compound there. And I learned a lot about the world of work. I also learned that I didn't want to be a chemist forever. And so I started exploring what other options there were. So I actually did some career counseling. So one bit of advice that I have for students is take advantage of career services now while it's free, because I had to pay for it because I was out of school. But the career services kind of stuff that I got was really useful. It didn't point me to this is your one chosen career. It gave me options to explore. And one of the things that kind of came up for me a couple times was industrial organizational psychology. And my first thought was, nope, not doing it. Don't want to counsel people. And thank goodness the person that I was talking to, the career counselor, said, oh, that's not really what they do. You should read into it. And so I was thinking maybe I'd get an MBA. And every time I looked into more specializations within an MBA, it kept saying you could do this with an MBA or a master's degree in IO psychology. So I started exploring more. And even though I had been working for quite some time, I had not ever taken a single class in psychology. So I didn't have even Psych 101 or Psych 1A or whatever it was called as an undergrad. So I just took it over the summer and gave it a try and loved it. It was fun and easy. So I kept going. And then I decided, well, let me see if I can get into grad school. So I met with a professor and just said, okay, so this is weird, but I'm a chemist and I want to be an IO psychologist, but is that even possible? She said, oh yeah, no problem. These are the things that you need to do. So another bit of advice that I have, I'm just sneaking in advice here, is don't be afraid to ask professors directly about what it is that you can do to get into grad school. I think some people feel like it's cheating, but it isn't cheating. You're asking for advice to put your best foot forward. You're not asking for an edge. You're not asking for any sort of special treatment. You're just asking for some advice. And most people, most professors really want you to put your best foot forward in your applications. And so she really helped me. She gave me a list of things that I should do. I did all the things and lucked out, and I got accepted at University of Connecticut, where I got my master's degree and then my PhD, which is the way that most PhD programs work. And then I was lucky enough to get a job here at San Diego State not too long after I graduated. So pretty fantastic.
That is really awesome. And yeah, that's one of the things I definitely try to tell students at both Mesa and SDSU is that the majority of professors at both places are there for you and they want to interact with you. It's just hard in really big classes.
Yeah.
But if you come up, we're all about it.
Yeah, happy to help out.
That's awesome. So I guess you kind of answered one of the first questions. So basically one of the motivations and reasons that led you to IO was because it was not counseling.
Yeah, that was huge. I also really, I'm one of those people, I want to do good in the world, and that can make you sound kind of, corny sometimes, but it's a sincerely held belief. Like I'm going to be working, I want it to be doing something good. And I think IO psychology has a lot to offer. If you think about how much time people spend at work, if you think about the effect that being in a really crappy job or having a terrible boss can have on you, I think the effects are really profound on individual lives. And so we have ways to try to make the workplace better for people. And on the whole, I think that's really good.
Awesome. So Just on that, I guess I'll start with like, what is one of your favorite parts, which I actually touched on just there, and what is one of your least favorite parts of kind of working in IO, etc.
So I guess one of my favorite parts is just the opportunity to study human behavior at work, right? So, I mean, I can answer this question from a couple different perspectives. I mean, one is that I am an IO psychology professor. Most people who go into IO psychology don't go on to become professors, right? So, I mean, for my job as a professor, I love being able to learn more about human behavior at work because I find it to be so interesting all the time. It's changing and it's interesting and people are so different and environments are so different. I'm endlessly curious about that. But I can also answer from the perspective of a practitioner, somebody who is out there working in companies. And I think there it's just being able to have an impact on people's lives and help companies work more efficiently, but also help workers have better work lives.
Awesome.
Oh, and then you asked about least favorite thing. I mean, least favorite thing about being a professor has got to be grading,
Yeah.
which is just the worst. It's time consuming. It can be tedious. That's not my favorite. And I think least favorite thing about being a practitioner for me, if I was a practitioner,
Mhm.
might be, um, you do have to study and do the things that your company asks you to do, right? Especially if you're working internal to a company, then you have to kind of fall in line with what they're looking for. If you're hired by a good company and you're in alignment with the kind of things that they're doing and the direction they're taking and their values, then that's not going to be a problem. But if you're hired by a company that isn't so great, I think that wouldn't work very well for me, and I would get out of that job as soon as I could.
I always think about like Walmart. Like
Yeah.
Walmart could definitely use an IO psychologist.
It's interesting because I mean, I know IO psychologists who work at Walmart.
Really, they have them. I didn't think they did.
They do. And I think, they try to make the work better for them, right? And
Yeah,
but I think there's some real fundamental values there that are just not aligned with my values that would make that not a good fit for me. But I can also understand people wanting to work within the system to make whatever improvements they
yeah,
can.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I remember seeing one documentary uh, on Walmart specifically, and they have something called a dead peasant policy, where like basically if one of their employees dies, none of the money or benefits go to their family, it goes to Walmart. And I was like, no. And
Yeah.
so hopefully maybe an IO psychologist will take care of that little policy eventually.
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because IO
Yeah.
psychologists don't have sometimes as much influence over the money, right?
Yeah.
And the benefits. We have influence over things like hiring and training and things like that. So that's why I think I tell students when they're looking for jobs, look to see how HR is viewed in the organization, right? Because oftentimes we work in HR departments. Um, and so it's helpful to see how HR is viewed. I mean, having the office as my background is kind of a great example, right? How does Michael Scott view Toby? Terrible, right? Like he's just terrible. Um, and so, would you want to sign up to be, I mean, not that IO psychologists do exactly Toby's job, but would you want to sign up to work for Dunder Mifflin? I don't know, maybe not. Um, so yeah, it's kind of interesting.
I love it. So I guess on that, since you mentioned HR, is graduate school necessary step to becoming an HR manager?
So this is a great question. So I'm so glad that it was on the list, because the answer is really no. I mean, I think what you hear in psychology a lot is, you have to go to grad school, you have to go to grad school, you have to go to grad school. And I think that is the most direct path in IO. If you want to call yourself an IO psychologist, you really do need a master's degree, right? You don't have to get a PhD, although I encourage you to consider one because why not consider it? But a master's degree is what you need to call yourself an IO psychologist, sort of with confidence. So I definitely encourage people to consider grad school. But let's say that you have some circumstances that make it difficult for you to go to grad school. You may have family circumstances. It may be difficult for you to afford graduate school. It may be that you had a rough patch in your educational career and your GPA is low. And it's
Mhm.
difficult to recover from that, right? So if your GPA is below a 3.0, for example, and you're not going to be able to get that up over 3.0 by the time you graduate, it could be tough for you to get into a reputable graduate program.
Yeah.
So, you know, for people who are in situations where graduate school just doesn't seem like it's in the cards, I encourage them to get involved at SDSU with the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM. It's called SHRM. Um,
Awesome.
and that is run by Dr. Michelle Dean in the business school. She's an HR professor. And but they are very open to having IO psychologists join them. So I know that there's an IO psychologist right now who is one of their officers,
That's awesome.
and they have connections to a lot of internships, and internships can be a great way to get your foot in the door with HR companies.
Mhm.
And I think what happens is if you do the IO emphasis here at San Diego State, you get a really strong background in IO, actually. I mean, much better than at almost any other university. You take that, you get into an HR position, preferably, I recommend a kind of a smaller firm. If you're
Mhm.
at a smaller company, they're less likely to be able to afford a full-time IO psychologist. And so then all of a sudden you're the big man on campus. And so you get an opportunity to ask for different developmental opportunities. Say, hey, it looks like you guys are going to be doing some hiring. Would you mind if I, you know, sat in on some of these meetings and, you know, offered some thoughts about how you guys are going to be doing hiring? Oh, you got to train the new employees. I have some ideas for how we can get people onboarded more quickly. Most small companies are really eager to have people who want to roll up their sleeves and contribute in new ways. That helps
Mhm.
you develop new skills. So as long as you kind of self-educate and I don't know, a little bit entrepreneurial in terms of the types of tasks that you take on, I think it is absolutely possible for you to work your way into IO psychology related work
Mhm.
with an undergraduate degree and work experience.
Awesome. So then, yeah, if people couldn't go to graduate school, as we kind of touched on, um, so someone also asked kind of that you mentioned that people should consider a minor in business, statistics, or HR. Um, are those things really important, especially if you wouldn't go to grad school? I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, no, 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 it does make sense. So I would say if your aim is to go to grad school, statistics is maybe the strongest minor. What I
Mhm.
find is that students often struggle with the quantitative portion of the GRE, and most schools require the GRE for admission. And so if you do a statistics minor, that's a way to compensate for a low quantitative score on the GRE. You can say, okay, well, maybe I didn't do great there, but I have a whole minor in statistics. And so you got to
Yeah,
trust that I can do statistics.
yeah, like
And
you don't need to do geometry anymore.
exactly, all the ridiculous math they make you do in the GRE. So it's
Yeah.
great. It's a great substitute, I think, for that. And so if you're really headed to grad school, then statistics is the minor I'd recommend the most.
Mhm.
If you're headed into kind of the work your way into the field approach, so no grad school, but you're just going to get in there and make it happen for yourself, then I think business or HR as a minor would be much better.
Mhm.
Um, and I think in business, I don't exactly know how their minors work. They have HR and they also have management. And so look into those. I'm not sure which allows you to do a minor. Either of those is good, just exposure to the way that business people talk. Because most IO psychologists don't get hired into companies where there's a lot of IO psychologists. We get hired
Mhm.
in with a bunch of other business people, and they speak a different language than we speak. They think about things differently than psychology students think. And so getting exposure to kind of the culture of business and the language of business would be really helpful.
Absolutely. Excuse me. Okay, so is I guess another thing, and this is probably along the lines of whether or not you want to go to grad school or kind of directly in the workforce. Is it really important to have experience in a research lab for either or both?
I would say that experience in a research lab is really helpful and really important for getting into grad school at most places. Not all places, but at most places. I mean, in a PhD program, if you don't have research experience, I can't imagine you would be competitive. You need to have something.
Oh yeah.
Um, for our master's program here at San Diego State, it's actually really competitive to get into our program. And so we also would, if you didn't have research experience, then you would really move to the bottom of the pile. And the pile is pretty large. We get anywhere from 70 to 110 applicants every year. So it's really competitive because we only let in about 4 to 8 students every year. So I'm not saying this to discourage you. I'm just letting you know, like this, it's not easy to get in, and research experience is one of those things that will really help you stay in the running. At other grad programs, it might be a little bit different. If you're just planning on working your way into the field, then research experience isn't as important. The other thing that it's good to know is that research experience doesn't have to be an IO. In a lot of other fields, it kind of needs to be aligned with what the field is, but in IO, we don't have that luxury. So at UC San Diego, for example, they don't have any IO psychology professors on their staff at all. There are no IO psychology professors that are hired full-time by by UCSD. So their students don't have an opportunity to do research with people who are IO psychologists. So does that mean that none of them are competitive for getting into graduate school in IO psychology? That's kind of ridiculous. So IO psychology admissions groups have to be flexible on that. And what we're really looking for is experience with just engaging in research. So if it's okay, let me describe what a good letter of recommendation sounds like.
Yay!
And that'll help you, I think, kind of figure out what it is you're looking to get out of a research experience. So in a good letter of recommendation, what I want to see is that, let's take a fictional person, Liz. Liz worked in my lab, and let's say I'm a neuropsychology person. I could be in public health. I could be in education. I mean, I could be anywhere. But the things that I want to be able to say about Liz are that, when we gave tasks to Liz, she was very reliable and very detail oriented. So she really understood what it took to be able to, for us to be able to rely on her. And so she was really conscientious about her work. She got it done quickly. She communicated really effectively. So she was able to let us know if things came up for her. But for the most part, she really met her deadlines well and was often done early. The other good thing to have here in a letter of recommendation are things like, not only did Liz do what she was asked, she was also a phenomenal team player. She asked for additional work when she had the capacity. She helped her teammates. She was really good at training the new people in the lab after she had gotten some experience. We were able to give her increased responsibility, and she was delighted to take on new roles. It could also be things like, Liz asked a lot of questions about the research and really wanted to understand what was going on. She quickly grasped the studies that we were running, and she asked a lot of good questions and made some interesting suggestions that helped us improve our research, right? So your tasks may be really pretty menial in a lab at any given place. It could be, here's a stack of paper surveys, please enter this into an Excel document. That's not giving you tangible skills that are critical for the experience at grad school. But the types of things that we're looking for is, what does this say about your work habits? What does this say about your ability to manage details? What does this say about your curiosity about research and your ability to connect the details of what you're doing to the big picture of science? Are you going to be a pain in the butt in my lab is a really important thing, right? And so you want to be reliable for me. You also want to be a really good team player. So those are the kinds of things we're really looking for.
Absolutely. On that as well, is there so like you mentioned, a lot of places don't have an IO lab, but are there labs that you might recommend looking into that are closely connected to IO versus neuro, personality or?
Right, yeah, neuro's kind of a little bit further out there. Although I would say, go think back about classes that you've had and what really resonated with you. What was there a professor that you really liked? Sometimes that alone can get you through the research experience. So look back at that and try to think about the professors that you've had and the stuff that you've learned. So if that's neuro, go for it, right? That's fine. In terms of content, though, I think social psych is a really good close cousin. Most IO psychologists really enjoyed their social psych classes. I know that I did. My mind was absolutely blown when I took social psych at the undergrad level. I loved it so much. And they're typically looking for a reasonable number of research assistants. So I think that that's really nice because they have capacity to take people in. And they're good at training research assistants because they know how to get them going, and there's usually pretty clear hierarchies and you work your way up. And so I definitely recommend that. But also, I mean, there are some paid opportunities sometimes to do research, and those are more often in areas like, you know, clinical or neuro or public health or education. So that's why I mentioned those other fields. Like even though they're not in the College of Sciences, they're in Health and Human Services, I still think that the types of research projects that they do can be quite complementary to the types of research projects that IO psychologists do. And so you can look at the San Diego State or UCSD Research Foundation, and they will list paid opportunities there. So, you know, keep an eye out for those if that helps. Or at SDSU, obviously, you can take them for course credit, which is another important way to kind of get paid, I guess, for your time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want to get paid?
Yeah, exactly.
So going a little bit more into the research side, so can you tell us a little bit about your lab, current projects, maybe a favorite project you worked on and finding?
So one crazy thing right now is that both of my research projects that I have that are, you know, in the about to be launched or we're working on phases have really been affected by this whole coronavirus pandemic. So one of them is we've been really interested in studying the way that people talk about their busyness at work and the way that other people talk about their busyness at work. And so what we've noticed is that there's this phenomenon where, you know, hey, how you doing? The response from a lot of workers, and I would say particularly what we call knowledge workers or, you know, kind of more office workers, is, oh my God, I'm busy. I'm so swamped. How about you? Yeah, me too. And so it's just a way that we talk to each other. So instead of it's fine or things are okay, we kind of have to engage in this talking about how busy we are. And I'm interested in understanding that phenomenon. So a couple of my grad students are looking at that, but one of them was particularly interested in the way that working remotely or virtual work might influence the way that you talk about being busy. So a big component of our survey is asking about working from home and working virtually. And so now, like huge, not like, you know, thousands or millions of people are now working from home where they didn't before. That has profound effects on our survey. So it delayed the launch of our survey by a few weeks because we needed to kind of go through the survey and take a look at it and make some decisions. Are we asking about how people are doing now? Are we asking about how people were before this pandemic, you know, really got on the radar screen and affected a lot of people's work? And so we made those decisions, we altered the survey, and now we are finally ready to launch. But that's kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah.
The other study that we're interested in launching later this year is with healthcare workers. So again, just like another population that's been hugely affected by what's going on in the world. So we're not even sure if that research project's going to be able to go or not. But that is with some children's hospitals. And what we're particularly interested in are the effects of patient aggression on healthcare workers, right? And so in a children's hospital, it's kind of an interesting setting. If you have a 3-year-old hit you, and I don't know how many of you guys have lived with 3-year-olds, but they'll hit you if you live with them. They're kind of crazy. So if you hit by a 3-year-old, that's one thing. But 16-year-olds are also pediatric patients, right? And so what happens if a 16-year-old tries to hit or kick or bite or scratch, right? And so we're interested in the kind of the psychological effects of experiencing that kind of aggression at work.
Yeah.
So yeah, so those are two interesting studies that we have kind of on the horizon, but also have had some changes with regards to how that's going to look.
It'd be very interesting to look at like people who've always worked at home or taught online classes versus people who are having to, and like what their thoughts are like. I don't know. I'm really excited about that. Cool.
And I think that there's been a lot of stuff that I've seen, like people saying, oh, this would be a great time to launch a study on what about work-family balance is another area that we study. And so what do you do when you've got kids at home and you're trying to work, right? So I have kids at home, but they're teenagers. So I told them, hey, I'm on a Zoom at 10:30, so you got to leave me alone. They're like, okay, didn't want to hang out with you anyway, so it's fine. But when they're 5, it's harder to leave a parent alone for an hour or whatever it is.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of interesting implications, I think.
so exciting.
Yeah.
Going back a little bit, I forgot there was one question that I really was kind of excited to know about was, what is a skill you use frequently on the job you didn't expect to use?
That is such a good question.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, honestly, communication.
Mhm.
And it's one of those skills that I think you use across, it's not just an IO skill, but I think it's across a lot of different things. Um, when you're in a position of leadership, when you're in a position where you're part of a team, and I think that's going to describe pretty much everybody pretty soon after you get out of here and get a job. Um, if not, if it doesn't already describe you now, communication is really, really important. And I think having taking some time to think about somebody else's perspective when you're communicating, and taking the time to pass information along, and to really not just pass information along, but sort of take opportunity sometimes to communicate your values.
Absolutely.
So as we've been shifting to online courses, that's been, of course, an enormous change for everybody, for professors and for students and for everybody. One of the skills that I had developed that I was able to rely on during this change was that I know how to do change management, right? Like, it's one of the things that IO psychologists study. And so I know that you need to communicate frequently.
Mhm.
And I know that it is sometimes important to communicate not just facts, but also, values or things like that. So when I was making this transition, I was honest. So being transparent and authentic is really important. And I said, I am going to put together a plan that will get us to spring break.
Yeah.
And then I will reassess and I will put together a plan for the rest of the year. So now people know what's going on in my head. I didn't have to tell them that, but I know that it would make them feel better to know what they can expect from me. I
Absolutely.
also told them it is important to me that I support your ability to do well in this class. I want you to be able to do well. If you want to do well, I don't want to get in the way of that. So again, even if I don't have details about, well, what's going to happen to the optional cumulative final at the end of the semester, which I don't have an answer to yet,
Yeah.
one thing that I was able to communicate is my value for supporting students and wanting to be able to do well and compensate for a poor exam one score. So I think that that ability to communicate has really been helpful for me in my job as a teacher, but it's also just one of those skills that's helpful kind of all over.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Communication is so key in like every nook and cranny of life.
Yeah. Yeah, and don't be fooled in thinking that I get it right all the time. I don't. Communication is one of those things that is constant, and so I will drop the ball here or drop the ball there, and you just got to remember, what you just got to keep trying and just, do the best that you can.
Absolutely. Excuse. So now let's see. Moving a little bit away. Oops, my internet connection. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. Your video is a
Oh,
little bit laggy, but I can hear you fine.
okay, cool. So IO is one of the fastest growing occupations in psychology. Why do you think that is?
Because it's the best. Um, it's so easy to answer. Um, No, in all seriousness, I think the increase in computers, the ubiquity of computers, the increase of data that we have, the increase in our ability to, um, kind of more scientifically study what's going on at work
Mhm.
has really set the stage for IO psychologists to come in and have really good influence. So one of the things that you'll find is that IO psychologists get hired by tech companies because tech companies like analysis, they like data. It's a very comfortable way for them to operate. And if they can operate the people part of their business from that kind of more, engineering, scientific background, they're kind of on board with that. So IO psychologists from our master's program have been hired at places like LinkedIn and Google and Qualcomm and Pinterest and Twitter and big tech companies that everybody's heard of, right? Um, and I think one of the reasons that that is because we often are able to combine our general love of statistics. Not everybody in IO psychology loves statistics, so don't let that be a complete blanket statement. But most of us like statistics a lot, and being able to combine that with understanding human behavior is really powerful. So you could hire statisticians, or economists, or people who really know their way around numbers very, very well. But if they're talking about analyzing people data, really nobody does that better than IO psychologists, because we have that knowledge about human behavior that we can match with the statistics. So I think that's one of the really big areas that I think is helpful. And I'm hoping that we can get IO psychology to be a little bit more prominent, so that people think of us as a way to really add value to businesses. Both the bottom line, but also just in having a kind of a humane work environment.
Absolutely. Um, and also, like, what different positions would you really find IO psychologists? So we talked about like tech. Are there any like IO psychologists highly involved with like interactions with workers, management, personal interests? Were IO psychologists, do you think a lot of IO psychologists were hired during the Me Too movement to kind of gauge those interact questions? But
It's okay. I think I'm tracking. So I'm going to use this opportunity to plug a hobby of mine. I in November started a memes account. There's
yes.
no reason why somebody my age should be running a memes account. Let's be honest. However, I'm doing it because they're so funny, and they're kind of fun ways to really communicate about IO psychology. And
Mhm.
what this question brings to mind is I made a meme that actually ended up, being, pretty popular in my group of nerdy followers, which is a fortune teller, and she's got all these little cards set out in front of her. And it's sort of like, IO psychology students deciding what job they should have. And it was, each card had a different job title on it. And there were a lot. And I didn't even use all of the potential titles. So, sometimes people like to ask, well, what's a typical day in the life of an IO psychologist? And it's like, there is no typical day. Some people are not talking to people. They're hiding behind in their cubicle with their spreadsheets or their, data analysis, and just making it happen. Some people are out there wheeling and dealing and talking to people. We have people that are in learning and development, people that are in change management, people that are in organizational development, leadership training, just all kinds of stuff. And so it's a field that's really flexible to accommodate a lot of different interests, a lot of different working styles, a lot of different ways of being. So I think that's definitely one of the things that I didn't know about IO psychology, because it feels like such a specialized field within psychology, right? Like you've got, clinical and social, and then, like you narrow it down, then you've got this little tiny slice that's IO psychology. But then when you look at IO psychology, boom, there's this whole world in there of stuff you can do. So that's really interesting. With regards to being hired because of the Me Too movement, I would say potentially yes. I know that, for example, one of my former students is working for a diversity and inclusion consulting company, specifically for diversity and inclusion. And so that kind of works pretty neat. And are those people being asked to help out with things like, sexual harassment in the workplace, and gender, racial, religious equality in the workplace, whatever it is? And the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, trying to create an inclusive work climate is really important, and IO psychologists have a lot of things to say about that. We have a lot of research that we've done on that. And so I don't know if it's directly tied to, hiring a lot of IO psychologists, but I know we do work in that area.
Absolutely. That's so cool. What are like maybe 3 big things that, regardless of what area of IO you're working in, you will probably kind of engage in, or the skills? So like making assessments to gauge that diversity and inclusion, or coming up with like curriculums to teach employees about like bias in the workplace, those types of things.
It's interesting because I think, a lot of that It does depend on the different type of job that you have. I would
Mhm.
say though, one of the things that I tell our graduate students is one of the things that we're really trying to teach them over the course of the 2 years that we have them is how to ask the right questions. And I
Absolutely.
think when I was an intern, when I was in grad school, I was like, I'm just a lowly intern. I'm surrounded by all these MBAs, and they are
Mhm.
all, they've been doing HR for years, and I'm just here to learn and whatever. Well, I get into these meetings, and I asked a question, and people stopped and looked, and they were like, "That's a really interesting question. I haven't really thought about that." I was like, "That's not an interesting question. That's an obvious question, right?" Like when you're hanging out with other IO psychologists, there was nothing novel or brilliant about that question, but they didn't realize that I was thinking about it from a totally different perspective. So I would say that one of the things that IO psychologists in general do is we ask questions that hopefully people find enlightening, and thought
Yeah.
provoking and not like annoying. Although I know that sometimes there's that too. You have to overcomplicate things. Yeah, we do,
Yeah.
because turns out human behavior at work is complicated. But but that's one of the things that I think is sort of universal, is that we ask a lot of questions. We see the workplace as being just very, very interconnected. And so you've got like individual behavior, but then you have the whole environment around that that influences individual behavior. And so we
Mhm.
want to know about all of it. So whatever it is that we're trying to do, we typically want to know who are the people that we're talking about and what's the environment that they're in, social, physical, whatever it is. We want to know about their environment so then we can provide better recommendations. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So understanding like all that stuff in terms of like how to ask the appropriate questions and how to like move forward on with those questions in mind.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Uh, and then going kind of towards just like general work, a couple kind of fun questions, or at least I thought they were fun, is like, how do work environments create different stressors and do they affect people in the same way? So, for example, does physical stress from working construction manifest in a similar way as stress for office workers or professors?
It's a great question. And I just talked about this in my Psychology 319 class. So it's so fresh in my mind. And it's a great question to follow up what I was just talking about. So when we talk about workplace stress, which is a wonderful, amazing topic, um, uh, two things that I want to make sure that I say. One is that it kind of falls under the umbrella of occupational health psychology, which some people consider to be a specialty within IO psychology. Some people consider it to be kind of a specialty within IO psychology, but also a little bit broader. It may include other areas as well, health psychology, community psychology, things like that. But occupational health psychology definitely covers this area of stress. It's one of the things that is very central to researchers who are in this field. So I wanted to put a little shout out for OHP because that's pretty great stuff. Um, with regards to physical versus say social or psychological stressors, how they influence people is really dependent on the individual. There are some things that are going to be kind of similar. So we talk about stressors as demands that are placed on a person, and if you
Mhm.
work in a noisy environment, that is a demand. And
Yes.
when you think about noisy environments, you often think about construction. I also would like to submit that daycares are noisy places as well, right? And it's a different type of noise.
Mhm.
Hearing that noise and getting that kind of constant input, the auditory input, takes away some of your cognitive resources because you're spending that currency that you have on trying to edit that out or trying to manage it. But some people are more resilient to that, and the type
Mhm.
of noise matters. Some people are totally fine with a jackhammer because it's relatively easy to. Some people, though, hear the noise of kids playing or fighting or crying or whatever things it is that they're doing, and they think of it all as just happy, normal kid noises. Other people are just completely driven up the wall by that, and same thing for jackhammers, right? So there's a lot of room for individual that's just within the physical. So it's impossible to say that, well, my job is more stressful than yours because I have to listen to noisy children all day, and all you have to do is respond to the 800 emails that you get every day. It I don't really like the suffering, with regards to that. I think it's fair to focus on what is what's the demand that's being placed upon you? What are the resources that you have to meet that demand? How can we dial the demand down? How can we dial resources up?
Yes, absolutely. That's awesome. Let's see. Okay, so also on top of like all of that good stuff, industrial organizational psychologists use psychological principles and research methods to solve problems in the workplace and improve the quality of life. How can you test this in a lab, and is it always effective when it's applied in real life?
Ooh, this is a tough one, and I don't know how many of you have taken social psych. I have gotten into some serious arguments with social psychologists about this. Um, And what it really comes down to from a research methods perspective is the eternal battle between internal and external validity, right?
Mhm.
So internal validity is basically like the experiments that you're running, you're pretty sure that manipulation, the thing that you changed, causes the outcome, right?
Mhm.
Social psychologists are very focused on internal validity. They really want their experiments to kind of lock everything else down. We change one little thing and we see what the effect is. It's very pure.
Yeah,
IO psychologists are more interested in external validity and how do we take the results and generalize them. So, the argument, so many of you guys may have had Dr. Marks as a professor. You may have Dr. Marks in the future as a professor. He's a great guy, a wonderful teacher, a friend of mine, and he and I have argued about this for a long time. We'll argue, I think, until we retire. Particular thing. And he'll say things like, well, you call what you do research, but really, like, do you really know that what you're saying causes this really affects that? Because I think you're just doing correlations. Like, you don't really know that this causes that. Uh, and then I tell him, well, if you want to think that putting people in little cubicles and, giving them some sort of fake scenario is going to really, help you understand human behavior at work, you're crazy, because people don't live like that. It's noisy out in the world, and we get out there and we try to measure what we can measure, even though it's noisy. The truth is that neither of us is right, and both of us are right. You need both approaches. IO psychologists are a little more comfortable with chaos. We're a little more comfortable with noise, and we're a little more comfortable with trying to understand what's going on, even though it's complicated.
Absolutely. And what is the kind of biggest methods used in IO psychology for like transferring research to application?
This is an age-old battle in IO psychology. We call it the science practice gap, right? So there's people that do research, people who do practice, and there's inevitably going to be a gap between the things that we do. So people who are in practice, practitioners, will look at the research and say, great, but literally who cares, right? This is way too tiny. This is never going to work. You're studying the wrong thing, whatever it is, right? Um, and then, so I think it's important that we have opportunities to come together and work together, partner, to be able to make sure that the researchers are studying things that are useful and in practice, and the practitioners are able to understand and read and access what's going on in research. So I think there's some real challenges there. I think one of the ways that we help to bridge that gap is by, researchers who are willing to write things that are more accessible to the general public, right?
Yeah.
Because what would be nice is if it's not just IO psychologists who are following our recommendations, but really any business leader anywhere. And so we need to do a better job of being able to translate that. So scientific communication is something that I think is really, really important. And I think it's important that we touch base and see what's going on so that we are studying the right things. Practitioners don't have the luxury of taking the time to set up an experiment or run a correlational study or see what's going on. They have to make decisions now. So science moves slowly compared to practice. Practice has to move fast and make decisions and keep rolling amidst all the changes, right? Wouldn't it be nice to have a better handle on what it means to be working remotely? We have some things that we can share, and we have shared about that, but we don't have as full of an understanding as we would like. So yeah, so trying to get research findings into practice is kind of one of those things we're going to struggle with forever. But I think
Yeah.
the biggest thing that I would like to promote is to have people really appreciate scientific communication as an art a little bit better. I think people
Mhm.
get a little bit weird and a little bit snooty about, well, I do research, but I don't need to communicate with the common people. And I think that's ridiculous. That minimizes the impact of our work if we take that tack.
Yeah, especially if you're working on the research to be applied to the people, you
Mhm.
need to be able to communicate that.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, and oddly enough, I mean, I don't mean to keep promoting my memes account,
I
but
love it.
so dorky. But that's, I mean, honestly, like I started it because I thought it would be funny, right? I have a kid who's a senior in high school and taught me how to make memes, and then just sort of unleashed a beast, right? But um, but as it turns out, it's actually a really good vehicle for scientific communication because memes are quick, they're understandable, and it really can help people grasp some really key concepts in a way that's stickier than, well, here, read this, 500 page, or 500 word blog that I wrote. Well, okay, that's one thing, but a meme, man, you hit it quick and you get out. So, yeah, I guess maybe that's one of the reasons why I think it's interesting is because I'm dabbling in it in different ways right now.
Absolutely. I love it. Do you have like how can people follow your memes?
So it's at IOPsych memes. So IOPSYCHMEMES. And that's on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So whatever platform you're on, we're there.
Follow Dr. Kathy, guys. I love it. And I guess my final question before I give you the floor to kind of wrap things together or maybe add anything else that we may have missed is would all companies benefit from having an IO psychologist, and what company or companies do you think needs them?
I mean, I'm always saying the world needs more IO psychologists. I would like to put one at every street corner, in every office, and everything. I also understand. I mean, we're expensive. Businesses are businesses, and they don't have the luxury of being able to hire IO psychologists, and that's kind of where consultants come in.
Yeah.
What I think is cool is one of my main goals in teaching about IO psychology in classes like this or in the Intro to IO class 319 is just exposing students to the fact that we exist.
Mm-hmm.
So even if your company is too small to have an IO psychologist, but you know that IO psychologists exist and you have a general idea of what we can do, then that might help you figure out where to go to get information to help you do a better job at your company in whatever people related stuff that you're trying to do. That alone is a win. So yes, more IO psychology everywhere, but it doesn't really, I think it's ridiculous to think that that's an IO psychologist in every company. The other
Yeah.
thing that's kind of maybe a little more sobering and ties back to something we were talking about earlier is businesses are run on money, and
Mm-hmm.
IO psychologists are often less focused on money than they are on people. It's one of the reasons why I love the field is I'm more interested in people than I am in money. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so businesses can be successful without IO psychologists, right? There's no arguing that Walmart is unsuccessful. They are a successful business. They are making money. They are so I don't want to pretend that an IO psychologist is essential for making businesses run well or that you have to treat employees to do well. There are clear models of companies that have been financially successful and maybe don't have a great track record of treating employees well. Um, so when I tell my grad students, don't fool yourselves in thinking that you are essential, you're not, which is why it comes back to values for
Right.
me is I want to work for a company whose leadership really values its workforce as a critical competitive advantage. As soon as that's your orientation, I can help you and I can add so much value. And I do like to think that kind of the good guys win in the end. But I know that the data might suggest otherwise, or there's certainly exceptions to that. Um, so yes, to more IO psychology everywhere. I think it is good for business, if not essential for business, but it's good for business. And I think that it's wonderful for just the planet, just for well-being.
Absolutely. It's kind of one of those things like in any area of psychology, you can't help someone who doesn't want the help. So if they have a helping orientation and good values, then you have the capabilities that go along with
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And then is there anything else you'd like to tell students?
Let's see. I guess I would say, I mean, for sure, if you haven't taken Psychology 319, take Psychology 319. I'm teaching it next semester, and it's at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sorry. I tried to get a classroom at a time that was later. It's not the best time of day, but I personally am energetic at that hour of the morning. And so even if you don't really feel energetic at 8 o'clock in the morning, I do. So come on in and I will have enough energy for all of us.
That's true.
Yeah, I really I like to bring my A game when I can to that class in particular. And I think the class is a lot of fun. So as you're exploring your options, definitely take a look around and try out different classes. And I would encourage you to try IO, because sometimes you think you're going to go into clinical and then it turns out that you didn't realize you would like this stuff as much as you do. So give that a whirl. I think the other thing too is that if you look me up on the department website, I do have my own professional website, and on there I have an FAQ, frequently asked questions link. And because I have been giving advice to students who are thinking about going into IO psychology for years now, I've been here for like 13 or 14 years, I have compiled a list of the questions I get asked most frequently on that website. So go to the website if you're starting to have questions about this and read there. If you have questions that aren't answered there, you can feel free to email me. It's just lisa.kath, K-A-T-H, at sdsu.edu, and you can ask me your questions, and I'm happy to help out.
Awesome. And that link is actually found in one of the many announcements I posted on Blackboard. So you should check that out. Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kath. This was so helpful and wonderful, and I know students will really benefit from it.
Wonderful.
And I love your office.
Thank you. I know. What a cool opportunity, right?
It is so cool.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks to any students who stuck it out and listened to the whole thing. Hats off to you for that. And good luck, everybody. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.